You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, my guest is going to take us into the world of AI, and I know it's a hot topic in the front of many people's minds. Matt and I had a brief discussion in the green room, and we'll get into that as we go. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Matt Leta. Is it Leta or Leta? I didn't ask you.
Leta, yes.
Leta. Okay, good. Well, Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so before we do get into the heart of the discussion, I always like to ask my guests to give a little bit of backstory. How is it that you started doing what you're doing, and what's your journey in the business world been up to this point?
Sure. I'll try to keep it short, but I started coding when I was 10, making sort of like games and pranks. And then I started designing when I was like 15 and professionally probably around the same time. And then I started my first startup, which was like a platform for artists. I was doing a lot of art at the time, and I wanted to create a platform that would kind of like allow artists to meet each other, which was called eventually Dropper. I started that when I was 19, and that was a very meandering journey because I didn't really know how to build companies and stuff. I started early on without much mentorship, but that kind of brought me, I originated in Poland. I left when I was 18. Then I lived in Ireland and Wales, then London, and eventually I ended up in Silicon Valley, and I exited that company around 10 years ago. And it grew quite big. It had several million pieces of art on it, and around 250,000 artists. And in order to connect those people together, we built algorithms. It wasn't called AI at the time. It didn't have much to do with AI, but they were fairly complex, and they would sort of intelligently connect people across different, set of parameters. And then from that, we started like a spin-off that was focused on future of work. That was like 2013, I think, when we came up with that. And our bet was that by 2020, most people will be doing some kind of remote work. So it was like a platform for remote work, which had a sort of like a dramatic adventure with, and ended up leaving and traveling the world. And so about 10 years ago, I started traveling for a few months, which ended up being more than 3 years. And during that time, I built a digital agency, and it was like an experiment. And what happened was I noticed a lot of issues that I want to help with, especially in Southeast Asia, like environmental issues, social justice, things like that. And so we've put the whole company under this idea of helping to build a better future. And what happened was that meant that we started working with a lot of kind of like future-focused types, especially Silicon Valley companies. And with those, we started doing like real AI. And because that's what they were doing, that's what they needed. At first, we learned from them, and so about 9 years ago now, we started doing AI, and primarily it meant building interfaces for various complex systems, but eventually also implementing machine learning and whatnot about 7-8 years ago, and that's how kind of like I ended up in this situation. And then about 2 years ago, when AI sort of matured to the degree that we could see like, wow, we can maybe use it for work now. I had this realization that all this time, because I traveled, and because I had this research from those previous startups on remote work, when I traveled, I built this company which at peak had 85 people, and everyone always only worked remote. We never had any office. And the idea was we don't want to create two categories of people, therefore everyone is equal, and so everyone needs to be remote because we will always have some people remote. But then what we ended up doing was, it's hard to run accountability across so many people remotely, so we had to have a pretty robust digital system and record everything in essence, know what's happening, all conversations and all tasks and stuff like that, which created a data set that we can train on. And so it became sort of a unique thing because there is there aren't many companies who for many years were remote only. And so every conversation, every task, every execution, every delivery happened online and has been recorded. And so we could start training systems, and we do to this day, but that's sort of how I ended up in that place. But another part of like what actually brought me here and to this research I've been doing now for about 3 years was that that company grew, doubled every year for 7 years. And so the power of exponential made it pretty successful. And I started investing and doing a lot of environmental and climate investing and nonprofit work, and created a nonprofit called Future Horizon on the side to sort of connect people around driving ideas around solving for a better future. Primarily it meant climate related work. And I sort of stopped focusing entirely on this business. It was operationalized, delegated, running. And then 2022 came, and we were still working with deep tech companies primarily. And suddenly they didn't have money because VCs didn't have money because the market changed, and they were the first ones to be hit, like Silicon Valley Bank went down and so on, right? And so we were suddenly owed a gigantic amount of money, and that was never to be paid, as it later turned out. And so we had to navigate it. And so I went into this rabbit hole of solving it for ourselves to see how can we become as efficient as we can, so that we don't take debt, but we still move the 7 figures that we are not getting from clients. We can still pay to our contractors and employees and stuff. That required us to like really hustle, but also find a lot of efficiency. And it came at the same time as this AI realization that AI is maturing. And so that became sort of like the core of the research. And at the same time, with our clients, who are often, bigger companies, Fortune 500 and mid-size, we we noticed that there is a sort of disconnection between how fast they can adopt to technology and how fast is AI starting to move. And so this became this kind of obsession of mine for a couple of years to try to really understand it. And I've talked to 150, 200 people, maybe, I think by now, and read something like 50 books, and have done online research, and sort of packed all of this knowledge into what we are sharing today. Maybe I'll stop here. Long monologue.
Fantastic. Yeah, yeah. Now, let's start with, you have an already best-selling book. What is the title of that book?
The Leap Guide.
Leap Guide. Okay. Very descriptive, and I'm thinking specifically, as I shared in the green room. I have been working with some business owners and company leaders who are trying to make that leap,
Yeah.
and realizing that they're trying to be as forward thinking as they can, albeit maybe a little bit handicapped by the tradition and experience that they've accumulated. So this brave new world of AI is part mysterious. It's an unknown, but yet it's an intuitive plus that they're trying to solve for.
Yeah.
And so, if I can use that as a little bit of a starting point, what would you say to a business owner who has that intuition that they believe somewhere, somehow AI can help their company? Where do they start
Yeah.
getting into it?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that it's not really a choice, right? So like I think in any category, it's just the timeline is different. But in any category, if you don't implement AI, if you don't embrace AI, it's just basically like not embracing electricity 100 years ago. And it's not a choice. It's just you must do it. Otherwise, you will become irrelevant, right? There isn't a business that doesn't run using electricity. And it's the same with artificial intelligence. We're past the point where it was a maybe. That was a few years ago. There isn't really a path that this is not a foundational element of our business logic. And so now the question is, how do we, where do we start? How do we do it? And it's not easy. The way I like to think about it is similar to our brain's evolution. So the way we, according to the trillion brain theory, at least the way we evolved is, we crawled out of the water, And we had our reptile brain, the first one responsive for sort of reactions and survival. And then we've developed our mammal brain responsive for connectivity and essentially social operation and coordination with larger groups. And then we developed our human brain, neocortex, that would kind of add logic and executive function and whatnot. And so similarly, we can look at evolution of business and the kind of business logic stack where we had people, the core of every business. No business has zero people, right? For now, at least. And then we have software and data, this layer we've been building for like 50 years or so, maybe a bit longer for some. That has allowed us to have automations and coordinate much larger coordination that was possible before, much faster coordination. And now we are adding this third layer, which is artificial intelligence. It adds this sort of new layer of reasoning, new layer of thinking and acting on managing those businesses, right? And so similarly, like in our own evolution, our brains didn't we didn't replace the previous elements, but we adjusted, and this new part evolved and became symbiotic with the rest. The same way we must think of AI now, that it comes and it sort of augments and adds to the stack. But as we welcome it, as we add it, we also need to think about the software and data, which many people realize. They tried some AI and they're like, oh shit, it doesn't work because we need better data, right? And so they start working on data, but that still is not enough. You still need to think about the people and how are they going to use it? Because I would bet from my experience, we've got about like sort of like 8 years experience building like AI with people who are AI engineers and so on. So that's in a way much easier. And about like 3 years implementing AI working with people who are not, just general workforce, right? And I would say that that's my personal sort of number, but I would say like 40% of people, even if they don't admit, they hate the idea of having AI in the workplace. And like they just disagree. They like on like a kind of like core personal value level, they disagree with it. And so the biggest threat right now to successful implementation of AI is actually not that the AI doesn't work or doesn't have the right data, that's also problems, but that it doesn't get used. Like if you roll it out through your team and they just kind of like reject it because they're afraid maybe that it replaces them, or they just don't like the idea, or they disagree. They think that very common today. They think that people should be doing the thinking, right? It's all those concepts will probably vanish with time. But for now, it's a big problem for any business leader because they can invest millions of dollars in the best infrastructure and nobody uses that. And so the people are a very important element to always have in mind. And how to start is also with people because you kind of need to have them from the beginning. And so those three layers kind of break down this way. If you're thinking about change, like essentially we need change, right? It's not just like a tool that we're going to implement and see high ROI. In order to see high ROI, and gigantic ROI is possible right now, right? Like you can think 20,000% ROI, insane numbers, right? But to get there, you need to be able to get it used, get it embedded into the organization, and actually for the data to flow and the workflow to flow between people and the AI. And so on those three layers, we have the people who are the slowest to change. Then we have software and data, which is sort of mid, it takes a few months and you can change it, right? You can, even if you have like an ERP that's everything is built on, you can technically change it over the course of just 3 months, right? And swap it out. But an intelligence is the quickest. I mean, you can build in intelligent solutions very fast. Like,
Yeah.
you have
You
it
know,
next day. Yeah.
what you're saying there reminds me, and what I'm getting ready to say, probably 90% of my audience won't even understand, but I'm old enough to be a witness. I was on the front line when our company went from mainframe computing
Yeah.
to wide area network desktop computing.
Yeah.
And there was a massive adoption challenge. It wasn't that the technology was wrong or bad. In fact, it was quite good, but it took the 15 to maybe 20% of us that were the early adopters to become the champions of convincing everybody else to
Yeah,
get on board and take
yeah,
advantage of it. Because instead of, and again, these are some terms a lot of people don't even understand anymore, but back in the days of mainframe, if you needed to spend computing resources, you had to get in a line, you had to queue up jobs to be submitted to the data center, and they would process them like a manufacturing
yeah,
plant, and your report would come out the back end at some designated time, and they would
yeah,
literally, it would be on print, and it would be in a mail slot, and you'd go pick it up, and now you had your results. But as we got to the wide area network, the desktop computing, as it was known, you could generate that report right there and put it on a printer
yeah,
right by your side. And now all of a sudden, you didn't have that long log jam at the data center. And slowly, people came around to that idea and the convenience of it. And then, of course, now fast forward, I've got more computing horsepower on my mobile phone than I ever had on my desktop at the
yeah,
company. So um, it,
yeah.
it, my point in saying all that in the general arc of evolution of business, we've been here before, guys. We've done this before, just with different tools and different technologies.
Totally. Yeah, the way we look at it is, and I'll come back to the people and exactly where to start aspect, because I know I have not given this yet, and I know many people are actually wondering that. But yeah, we see this as essentially a third or next gen digital transformation. First one was like paper to computer, computer to networks, networks to intelligence, right? Like high level. I mean, of course, we can subdivide it and go from desktop to mobile and stuff. But if you look at the entire spectrum, sort of roughly went this way, and so we think of it as next gen digital transformation, not AI transformation, because like AI is just part of it, and the important thing is to think about it holistically and to see like real ROI, real difference. You need to think about the entire spectrum. It's exactly like you said, and that remains true because humans move at human change, the human change speed, right? And so it's a similar process today. You need those champions, and the number one item that we've identified is to have the champion of champions. So like an executive sponsor, someone who has so much power within the company that they're kind of hard to say no to. I mean, of course, there are checks and balances and whatnot, but they are ideally, executive branch. They have a mandate to drive forward. And if you don't have that, we've been, our experience and our studies, talking to hundreds of people indicate that you will not succeed. It's simple as that. Chances of success are zero point 0.0. So you need that person who drives forward. And then after that, to start and to go and to actually, make it happen, you need just two things, high level. You need to start. That person needs to start and not wait. So not make it a big project, not hire a consulting firm and do strategy assessment for 6 months, and not, try to build up as a sort of like a grandiose vision or idea that needs to be created. And of course, they might need a vision to sell to the board or whoever is, or there's key stakeholders, but it should not be something that you wait for. The important thing is to start small and start, and then, which is the hardest part, not stop. Because over time, if you start and start going, the value you create, the change you create compounds. And the goal overall, as much as you're like focusing on technology, implementing AI, becoming an AI powered business or AI native business even, your goal is to change culture. And AI luckily helps with it now. It's much faster than it was, that move from mainframe to desktop probably took like 15 years, or a while, right? Except for the
Took a while. Fortunately for us, not that
yeah,
long. We were a reasonably
yeah.
aggressive change management oriented company, but yeah.
Yeah.
It was years. It was years, not weeks and months. It
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
years.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and even when we worked with Google, like when they were going to mobile, right? So the Google imagined this, now, owning Android and whatnot. But there was a time when no one at Google believed that mobile is the next thing. And they were afraid of it. They didn't like that idea. So Google had to, you know, and at the time it was, I think, Sergey actually pushing the initiative. So top, they had this executive sponsor. But then what they had to do is put those champions in every single department throughout the world, so that they were like people who believed mobile is the next thing, in order to start getting those people excited. And that alone took like 2 years probably. And at Google, right? And
Yeah.
so at other companies, and that was quite recent. I mean, that was like what, 15 years ago. And so today, it's faster again, but it still takes time just because people take time. And that's why it's so important to start early, because implementing AI will not take you time. Implementing AI, optimizing things to the factor of 99% in cost reduction is possible, but it needs to get used. It needs to get implemented. And for that, those people need to actually get moving. And the earlier you start, the earlier you will see results. And those results compound. So not only the effects compound, so you get more and more value out of it, but also the velocity compounds, because the more you do it, the faster the people are adopting it and the faster the system adapts. And so between those three layers, you've got people, software and data in the middle, and then the intelligence. We kind of nudge those elements piece by piece. And in the book, the first book, I've got second one coming, but in the first book, the Leap Guide, I basically give like a kind of step-by-step guide how to make it happen from that point. Like you have this executive, someone to give a mandate, then that executive finds someone on the team who's like ready to run and form a little group of 5 people only. Those people spend only 1 hour a week doing a certain exercise. And because there is a rigid and sort of refined over the years framework, they can achieve a lot with very little time. And because it's only 1 hour per week across a few people, and over time I recommend expanding it to many more people, but those few are already driving quite a lot of change. It's 1 hour a week. It's very hard to say I didn't have 1 hour when it's an important initiative within a business.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's really hard to stop. Because again, the hardest part is not to stop. There's so many companies that started some innovation initiative or new program or whatever, and a few months later, the focus changed, their priorities changed, their business became tougher or whatever, and they gave up, right? And they made
Right.
no progress. And
So
today's
really,
yeah,
what I'm hearing you say is at the core of this, it's just another version of a change management project in,
it's really, yeah,
in a fashion, because implementing this new thing is a change. It will have to not only change the what I would call the physical aspects of operation, but it does change the people aspects. So you've still, as with all change initiatives, you've got the human element, the pushback, the resistance,
yeah.
the
Mhm.
uncertainty, the frustration, the fear, all of those things that
Absolutely, yeah,
are nothing but human emotion that
yeah.
enters into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably even more fear. Like the last wave of digital transformation with networks was mostly things like, okay, we're implementing Salesforce. Everyone hates it, but after 3 years, everyone's using it, right? No one, people didn't like it. They still don't, maybe, but they weren't like afraid. Oh, I'm gonna have to file all this information into a CRM. It will replace me, right? And today there is a lot of fear, and just general apprehension to AI. So I think for leaders of businesses who really want to embrace AI, the hardest not to crack is to get their people excited for this, right? Because it doesn't necessarily replace them. I mean, of course, if you're optimizing departments or various activities, some people might be displaced, but it's not like you're gonna suddenly invite an agent and that agent is gonna be doing someone's job. That's just marketing speak that's everywhere, and no one's seeing ROI on that activity right now. But the when it comes to actually embracing AI, those people need to become sort of AI positive and then eventually sort of AI native themselves, ideally, right? And that takes time, even for us. We're called Future Works, and we've been at it for quite some time. And even internally, we're seeing, it takes time for people to really like open up to it, accept that, okay, well, now I'm thinking differently. Like, if I'm working with this. Like maybe some the work that I used to be proud of, that it might work, now it's actually better done by something I use, and I'm kind of changing how I think of how I think.
Right.
And that's
Well,
important. Yeah.
in several of the larger corporations that I've had a chance to work with who are making strides in their own adoption and use of AI, at this time anyway, and I don't see it changing for these companies, and I'm not going to name names for confidentiality reasons, but unilaterally, they all have a policy that says we may generate findings from
Mm.
AI, but we're not going to act on those without human
Yeah.
acceptance and human acknowledgement that that's the outcome. And so they're insisting that there be that human interface, whether it's management approval authority or in the case of a sales initiative, a sales agent having the final say on what gets communicated out of the findings. And I think that's where the notion of replacing mass numbers of workforce probably breaks down is that I, at least at this point, again, I think the smarter companies are saying, no, it's just a tool. It's
Mm.
just another way to get our information, assemble it, and prepare ourselves for whatever business decision we're going to make, whether that's a proposal to a client or a process adoption that's something new and different. We're still going to have that human final
Mm.
say in what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's ultimately it's up to your organization profile, how you use it. But thinking of it as just a tool is very limiting, and it will be very hard to see like huge ROI. Because if it's just a tool and not something that's built into the kind of like the fabric of the organization on the sort of the core kind of level where how you understand how the entire process of the organization functions, then it is just a tool. Then maybe it helps someone here and there. But anyone who's using copilots and chat GPTs and stuff like that, they probably have not seen, a big improvement in their work. I mean, they might be able to generate some document or get ideas or research something faster, but it's not like it's going to make you 100 times more productive as a department, let's say. There's nowhere near. In fact, the actual difference when measured is probably like 5%.
So
And
let's
yeah,
let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about the other issue that I hear talked about frequently, and that
yeah,
is data security and privacy and protection
yeah.
of intellectual property and all that. So somebody builds an AI bot specific to their business, they're packing it with all this information.
Yeah.
What are the protection opportunities and the security parameters that can be
Mhm.
leveraged to avoid accidental leakage out into the open market?
Well, yeah, there are a few, there's a whole set of considerations here. Like, luckily, it's not that hard to build systems that are secure right now. And also, a lot of companies already use systems that just like would interface with it and already have data management practices. Like, if you don't already have data security governance, then you need that, right? Like, any company needs that, whether they use AI or not. But ultimately, AI just works with data and that software and data layer in between. If that software and data layer is used, then of course you can decide whether the model is if you want to be highly secure on-prem and running on your own system. I will say that for us implementing this for the past few years, nobody really does that. There was like a wave, maybe like 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when people were really for on-prem because it's secure, nobody trusted OpenAI and so on. But then, everyone trusts Microsoft. And Microsoft has Azure, and they already have their data there. So they started trusting Azure AI, and because of that, they started trusting OpenAI, and OpenAI, started doing a lot of enterprise deals. And so that trust has increased to the level where we're seeing a bunch of people wanting to implement DeepSeek, which I would say is pretty risky. And it's for the adventurous only, but it is much cheaper, faster, and so on. Now we've got another player now offering, models that are even cheaper to use than DeepSeek by the factor of currently, I think like 15x. And DeepSeek was already cheap. And that's Google. Like, would you not trust Google with your data? Like, most companies do. And so, I would say that beyond, like on the AI layer, this part is solved, but now the policy in terms of how people use AI themselves, again, going back to behavior and people, that's important because a lot of people have ChatGPT now, right? And or Claude or whatever their tool of preference is. They copy paste stuff. Yeah, they will take a document, put it there. It makes their work quicker, and get an output, put it back, and that's a huge problem because those models are not within the enterprise bucket. They're just a private, usually $20 a month, so sort of simple version. And so policing that and using, either TRISM system across if you're a bigger company, or simply just incentivizing people to use your internal version of it is excellent. And what you can build, and it is excellent. We have that running for our company. Occasionally we build it for clients. You can build a system where all your documents and data sort of resides where they are, in your ERP or in your Google Drive or in your task management tool. Then connect that through APIs to like a data lakehouse that has a set of vectorized databases, or at least one. And then that you can make available to your own deployment of those models, right? So you can have Chat GPT and you can have Anthropic's models and so on right there. Google's anything, right? XAI if you want to, and Grok. And so you can let your team then use those models. For them, the incentives is such, well, I'm not going to be paying, outside for the model, right? And so they use it internally. You end up picking up the bill, but you only pay per usage, and you get the benefit of being able to monitor what's happening. And I think that's essential for every business now to build something like that. Another benefit of it is if you do it right, nobody needs to copy paste because that stuff is already connected and can fetch documents and information from your system. So you don't need to copy paste. And then the important thing is to save to create the data lake house in a way that, let's say, there's someone working on a project and only they should have access to that particular project. You need to build it in a way that other people or AI used by other people doesn't have access to that particular chunk of information. And that's not that easy, but it's totally doable. We've done that many times over. And this way you have full security really. And then you can control. There are like TRISM platforms that allow you also like monitor traffic and how people use AI in many other ways. But in general, yeah, that's how we do it. Another aspect is ethics.
Yeah.
Which are like an afterthought for pretty much everyone, but actually they're quite important.
Yeah. Understood. Well, Matt, this has been great. I feel like I could go on. I've got so many questions, but unfortunately, we need to bring this to a wrap here for this episode. But tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more.
Sure. So my contact and the both books, because I've got another one coming out soon, which is just titled 100x and breaks down what do we mean and why is this possible. And Leap Guide are both at the same. All of this is at one address. It's leap.guide, leap.guide, and from there you can also subscribe to our newsletter. We've got over 35,000 people now who get a weekly dose of kind of our research and thoughts and findings, just for free. So yeah,
Great.
go out there.
Great. Well, perfect. Well, that's great stuff. Thank you so much for sitting in. And as always, folks, we will have that link available in the show notes. So feel free to hop down and check that. At this stage, I do like to remind you, if you're listening on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives, and leave us some comments and feedback. For now, I'm going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.